The desert had a way of stripping everything down to what mattered. No shade, no mercy, no second chances. Sergeant Emily Carter sat on an upturned ammunition crate behind FOB Ridgeline's supply tent, her back against the canvas wall, her hands doing what they always did when she had 3 minutes to breathe, taking something apart and putting it back together. Today it was a battered Remington 700 that belonged to no one, technically. It had been sitting in the equipment locker since before she arrived, its scope cracked at the mount ring, its stock wrapped in friction tape that had dried out and peeled in the heat. She wasn't supposed to be touching it. She was logistics, supply chain. She ordered ammunition, tracked field rations, maintained the manifest for every weapon that entered and left FOB Ridgeline. She did not fire them. That was the understanding. The sun was at its worst angle, not overhead, but tilted just enough to pour directly into the open flap of the tent, turning the air inside into something that felt less like breathing and more like swallowing. Emily didn't move out of it. She was used to the heat by now. 2 deployments in this region had taught her that fighting the sun was a waste of energy you didn't have to spare. She pressed the scope mount carefully with her thumb, felt the wobble, and reached into her kit for the correct Allen wrench. A quarter turn. Another quarter turn. She brought the scope up to her eye, not to aim at anything, just to check the reticle for drift. Clean. Centered. She set it back down. Harder. Private First Class Danny Okafor appeared at the tent entrance, squinting against the light. He was 22, younger than most, and he had a habit of announcing himself like he expected to be turned away. Sergeant Hayes is asking about the SAT radio battery manifest. Says 3 units went out yesterday, and only 2 came back. Third one's in Lieutenant Garza's kit, Emily said, without looking up from the rifle. He signed for it Tuesday. Tell Hayes to check column D on the secondary sheet. Okafor hesitated. His eyes moved to the Remington. You fixing that? Adjusting the mount. Sergeant Briggs said that thing's been broken since February. The mount was loose. The rifle itself is fine. Okafor looked at her for a moment, not with suspicion, more with the mild confusion of someone who had filed Emily Carter under a certain category and was now encountering data that didn't fit. Then he nodded, turned, and was gone. Emily listened to his boots on the packed sand until the sound faded. She raised the rifle again. Through the scope, across the open ground between tents, she could see the flag at the east post snapping hard to the left. Wind from the northeast. She watched the direction of the sand dust rising along the perimeter fence. She noted the angle, the height, the way the heavier grains fell earlier than the lighter ones. She lowered the rifle. She didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. Commander David Harris ran FOB Ridgeline the way he ran everything, with a terseness that some people called efficiency and others called something less charitable. He was 44, lean in the way desert postings made men lean, with pale gray eyes that assessed everything in the room within 3 seconds of entering it. He had been in the service for 21 years. He had stopped being surprised by most things a long time ago. Emily Carter was not someone he thought about. He knew she existed. He knew she was competent, her supply records were clean, her manifests never had errors, and in 2 months of operating out of Ridgeline she had never once caused a problem. That was exactly what he wanted from logistics. Invisible, accurate, unremarkable. He had no idea what she did with her off hours. He had no reason to. That evening, at the briefing for the following day's patrol, Harris stood at the terrain map and pointed with a collapsible baton at the ridge system 12 kilometers northeast. His senior staff, Lieutenant Garza, Sergeant First Class Briggs, and Master Sergeant Cole leaned over the table. Emily sat against the back wall with a notepad, there to document equipment requests. Patrol route follows the dry riverbed to here, Harris said, tapping the map. Then up to checkpoint Kilo. Intel has movement on this ridge in the past 48 hours. Possible recon activity. We go in, assess, pull back. Clean and quiet. What kind of movement? Briggs asked. Unconfirmed. Could be nothing. Could be an observation post. Could be an ambush position, Cole said. That's why we're going to look, Harris said. He closed the baton. 30 personnel. Standard loadout. I want the SAT uplink maintained through the whole operation. He didn't look at Emily when he said that. He didn't need to. Maintaining the uplink was her job. She wrote it down. The morning smelled like cold stone and diesel. They moved out before first light. 30 soldiers in 2 columns. The ridge system a dark serrated silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. Emily walked with the communications section, the SAT radio unit strapped to her back alongside her personal kit. She carried her service sidearm in its holster. She had not been issued a rifle for this patrol. No one had thought to issue her one. The dry riverbed was worse than the map suggested: loose rock and ankle-deep sand. The kind of terrain that stole energy without giving anything back. By the time they reached the approach to checkpoint Kilo, the sun was up and the heat was already building. Emily watched the ridge as they climbed. She noticed things. The way the rock formations on the northeast face created natural defilade positions, places where a person could lie flat and see everything below while being almost invisible from the ground. The way the wind, which had shifted overnight, was now coming out of the southwest, which meant anything fired from the northeast ridge would have a leftward drift at distance. She filed these observations away and said nothing. They reached checkpoint Kilo at 0800. By 0810, the ambush had already begun. The first shot came from above and to the right. Emily heard the crack of the round before she processed what it was. That distinctive double sound of supersonic fire. The snap of passage followed by the concussion of the muzzle blast arriving a beat later. Then the soldier 3 meters ahead of her, Private Henley, dropped, and everyone was moving. Contact northeast. Contact northeast. The riverbed they'd used as approach became a liability in 2 seconds flat. Open ground, no cover. Harris was already shouting, directing the column to the rock outcropping on the western edge of the checkpoint. Emily moved with them, low and fast, the radio unit banging against her spine. She slid behind a boulder. Her hand went to the radio handset automatically. Ridgeline base. This is Kilo Actual. We are in contact. Northeast ridge. Grid. Static. She adjusted the frequency. More static. We've got jamming, she said to no one in particular. Briggs was crouched 2 meters to her left. How bad? SAT uplink is down. I can try line of sight, but the ridge is blocking the angle. Try it. She was already trying it. More shots came. Not scattered, deliberate, patient, controlled. 1 round every 90 seconds to 2 minutes, each one targeted at anyone who moved. Emily recognized the rhythm immediately. This was not suppression fire. Suppression fire was meant to keep heads down. This was something else. This was a sniper working. She rose just enough to look through the gap between her boulder and the one beside it. The northeast ridge, she measured the distance in her mind, using the landmarks she'd noted on the approach. The first rock formation was perhaps 800 meters. The second, where the face jutted out into that natural defilade, was farther. Much farther. She brought out her notebook. She had a small map, the same one from last night's briefing, printed at 125,000 scale. She traced the features with one finger. 2,800 meters, she murmured. Maybe 3,100. No one heard her. Another shot. Private Reyes cursed, clutching his upper arm. Not critical, but the blood was immediate and visible. Harris was moving along the line, bent double, assessing. How many? Can't get a fix, Cole said. 1 shooter minimum, could be more. We push to that secondary position. The moment we break cover, we're exposed for 40 meters, Cole said. He'll pick us off. Harris looked at the ground for a moment. His jaw was tight. Then we need the uplink. Carter. He raised his voice without turning. Status on comms. Still jammed. I'm working on it. Work faster. Emily didn't answer. She was looking at the ridge. She was thinking about the wind. The situation did not improve. Over the next 40 minutes, the sniper fired 7 more times. 2 more soldiers took grazing wounds, nothing immediately life-threatening, but they were beginning to accumulate. Medical Sergeant Thornton, a steady man who never spoke above a necessary volume, was moving between positions with his kit, doing what he could. Ammunition was a growing problem. The patrol had loaded for an assessment, not a firefight. They were burning through what they had in short exchanges, trying to discourage any ground approach, but the sniper on the ridge didn't need to approach. He had all day, all the water he needed, and a position that gave him angles that their own weapons couldn't effectively answer. Emily had been quietly watching the shadows on the northeast face. She had narrowed it down to a single location. A slight depression in the rock face, just below the second jutting formation, a natural scoop in the stone that would allow a person to lie prone with their head and shoulders below the line of the ridge while still maintaining a sight line down into the checkpoint. The depression was dark even in full sun, almost invisible. She had identified it not by seeing anything, but by watching the pattern of where the rounds were coming from. The slight upward angle of impact, the wind drift on each shot minimal, which meant the shooter was compensating, which meant the shooter knew how to compensate, which narrowed the position considerably. She wrote down the bearing on her notepad. She wrote down the distance estimate. She wrote down the wind correction she would apply. Then she looked at the rifles around her. Garza had a standard M4, effective to about 500 meters, less in this wind. Briggs had the same. Cole was carrying a squad automatic weapon, which was useful for everything except precision at range. There was one designated marksman in the patrol, Corporal Whitfield, who carried an M110 semi-automatic sniper system. He was crouched 20 meters away behind a long flat rock, and he'd already attempted 2 shots at what he believed was the sniper's position. Both had missed. Emily watched him set up for a third attempt. She watched the way he was estimating the wind. He was looking at the flag on his own position, which was wrong. The wind at ground level here was different from the wind at elevation. At 3,000 meters, air moved in layers. You couldn't read the wind from where you were standing. She started to rise. Stay down, Briggs said sharply. She stayed down. She looked at her notebook instead. He's at 2 o'clock, Emily said. She said it clearly, loud enough for the 3 soldiers nearest her to hear. Briggs. Okafor, a private named Stanton who was on his first deployment and had the look of someone whose training was wrestling with reality in real time. Briggs turned his head. What? The sniper. He's at our 2 o'clock, approximately 3,100 meters, the depression just below the second rock formation, the one that looks like a shelf. Briggs stared at her. He was not an unkind man, but he had a framework for how information was supposed to arrive, and it wasn't like this. That's 3 kilometers, 3,100. Give or take 50. Carter. He said her name the way people said names when they were being patient. That's not possible. I know. She held up her notepad. The wind is running southwest at approximately 14 knots at ground level, but there's a gradient. It'll be running closer to 19 at elevation. That's roughly 5 to 6 minutes of angle drift to the right from that position. His shots have all had minimal visible drift, which means he's compensating for it. He knows where the wind is coming from. He's correcting for it every time he fires. Briggs looked at her notepad. He looked at her face. You're a supply clerk, he said. It wasn't cruel. It was just the truth of what he understood the world to be. Yes, Emily said. Can you radio Whitfield and tell him to try 2 o'clock at 3,100? Briggs didn't answer. He turned away. Harris heard about it secondhand. Okafor mentioned it while passing a water bottle. Something about Carter having a bearing on the sniper. Harris made his way to her position during a lull in fire. You have something, she told him. Same bearing. Same distance. Same wind analysis. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Whitfield tried the northeast face twice. He was reading the wind wrong. He was looking at his own position, and you know how to read wind at 3,000 meters. It was not exactly a question. I know what I'm looking at, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not belief. Not yet. But something in the vicinity of consideration. Tell Whitfield, he said. Whitfield listened to her with the expression of a professional being advised by someone who should not be in a position to advise him. He was polite about it. That was somehow worse than if he'd been dismissive. He adjusted his bearing slightly. He fired. The round impacted rock face. They could see the puff of stone dust but high and left of where Emily had indicated. He had corrected for the wind she described, but he had used a standard ballistic calculation that assumed flat terrain. He hadn't accounted for the slight uphill angle to the position, which shortened the effective range. The sniper on the ridge fired again 3 minutes later. Private Okafor went down clutching his leg. Not dead, but screaming. Emily watched Thornton move toward him. She watched 2 other soldiers try to provide cover and get pinned immediately. She watched Harris look at the ridge, then at the ground, then at the sky. She watched the way he held himself when he understood they were losing. She pressed herself back against her rock. She looked at her notebook. She looked at the Remington. No, she didn't have the Remington. The Remington was back at ridgeline, but Whitfield's M110 was 3 meters away. He was behind her rock now, reloading. She looked at it. She had never asked for anything on this deployment. She had never put herself forward. She had been invisible by choice, deeply, deliberately, carefully invisible. She thought about Okafor. She thought about her father. She picked up her notebook. Her father's name was Robert Carter. He had been a legend in a community that didn't put legends on record, a unit that didn't advertise itself, that didn't have press releases, that operated in places the government occasionally had reasons to not remember. He had been one of the finest long-range precision shooters of his generation, which was a fact known to perhaps 40 people in the world, none of whom would confirm it publicly. He had also been Emily's father. She was 7 years old. The first time, he put a rifle in her hands. Not a real one, an air rifle, modest caliber, designed to teach fundamentals. They were in the back garden of the house in rural Montana, and he had set up paper targets at 30 meters, then 60, then 100. He hadn't started with shooting. He'd started with watching. What's the wind doing? He'd ask. And she'd look around, and he'd say, don't look around, look at one thing. Find the thing that tells the truth. She'd learned to find those things. The grass at the edge of the field, the smoke from a neighbor's chimney, the way the leaves on the aspens move differently from the leaves on the cottonwoods. The gun is just the last part, he told her once, when she was 12 and had just made a shot at 400 meters that had surprised both of them. Everything before the shot is the real work. The shot is just when you find out if you did the work right. He'd been killed on a mission when she was 19. She hadn't been told much. She'd been told enough. She had enrolled in the military shortly after, not in the path he'd laid out for her, not in the direction everyone expected. She'd gone logistics. She'd buried the other thing. She'd told herself it was grief, and maybe it was, but it was also something simpler. She didn't want to be the legend's daughter. She didn't want to be measured against him for the rest of her career. She was good at logistics. She was meticulous. She was reliable. She built a clean, unremarkable record. She watched other people shoot. She never forgot what she knew. The ammunition situation became critical at the 90-minute mark. Cole made the report to Harris with the flat directness of someone reporting a weather forecast. They had enough for approximately 20 minutes of sustained suppression fire. After that, they were down to personal sidearms and whatever they could scavenge from the wounded. Back up? Harris said. Radio still jammed. I can try a satellite burst. Do it. The satellite burst got through barely. A compressed text format emergency call rather than voice. Acknowledgement came back in fragments. Nearest support was 40 minutes out. Minimum 40 minutes was a long time. Harris looked at the map. The withdrawal route ran back down the dry riverbed, the same route they'd used on approach. Open ground for 400 meters before any meaningful cover. The sniper on the ridge had angles on every meter of it. If we pull back, Cole said quietly, he'll take us the whole way. I know. He's patient. He's been firing every 2 minutes like clockwork. I know. Harris looked at the ridge. The sun was high now, midday harsh, and the rock face was bright enough to hurt the eyes if you looked directly. He shielded his face with one hand, the moment of clarity that comes before a decision that has no good answer. 3 meters away, Emily was watching him. She had already made her decision. She was waiting to see if he would make a different one. Then Private Holloway, who was barely 20 years old and had been steady throughout and hadn't made a sound, took a round through the shoulder and went down hard. Not fatal. Probably not fatal, but he screamed in a way that traveled through everyone present like an electric current, and in the silence after it, the only sound was the wind. Harris straightened. We're done, he said. Fall back. Give me one shot. Emily was already moving not away from the position, but toward Whitfield's M110. She picked it up carefully. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She checked the scope. It was a loopholed Mark IV. Well maintained. Zeroed. Good glass. Harder. Harris's voice was low, but there was iron in it. Put that down and fall back. I need 30 seconds. You need to fall back, Commander. She said it the way her father had taught her to say things she meant. Without force. Without apology. Just with weight. Give me one shot. 30 seconds. If I miss, we're in the same position we're in now. The pause lasted 4 seconds. She was counting. You'll get everyone killed standing there. I'll get everyone killed if I don't. Briggs said, Commander, let's go. Stanton, to no one. She's going to get us all shot. Cole, very quietly. Harris. Harris looked at her. His gray eyes moved across her face like he was reading something, trying to find the line between desperation and competence, trying to figure out if there was a meaningful difference right now. Leave her, said a voice from the back she didn't know who. She's not even a shooter. Emily lowered herself to the ground. She lay prone behind the long flat rock Whitfield had been using. She set the rifle's bipod. She found the position, the same one she'd been watching for 90 minutes in the scope. She was already doing the work. She breathed. The scope was 10x magnification. At this distance, 3,100 meters, even 10x magnification showed her nothing more than a shadow in a depression in the rock. She wasn't going to find a clear target by looking hard. Looking hard was the wrong approach. Her father's voice, patient and a little amused, the way it always was when she was trying too hard. Don't chase the target. Let the wind tell you. She stopped looking at the shadow. She looked at everything else. The sand on the flat ground between her and the ridge. She could read the surface movement, the way the lighter particles skimmed along the surface while the heavier ones rolled. Wind speed at ground level, approximately 14 knots. Direction, 228 degrees, roughly southwest. But this was the ground. She needed the elevation. She watched the ridgeline itself, specifically the plume of dust that was perpetually rising from a dry patch near the base of the second formation. At ground level it rose straight up. At approximately 20 meters it bent. At 40 meters it bent more sharply. She calculated the gradient. At elevation, approximately 19 knots. Same direction, slightly steeper angle. Distance, 3,100 meters. She'd been watching the patterns of fire all morning. The sniper was at 3,100, not 2,800, not 3,300. She was certain. Ballistic correction for 3,100 meters with a 300 Winchester Magnum Whitfield's ammunition. She'd confirmed the caliber when she picked up the rifle. The M110 in this configuration. With this glass, with this ammunition. She'd never fired this exact system, but she understood the physics. She dialed the elevation turret. Click, click, click. She counted them exactly. She dialed the windage. The number felt strange, aggressive, more correction than anyone would naturally apply. She applied it anyway. She settled her cheek to the stock. The world around her went quiet the way it always did, not truly quiet. She could still hear the wind, still hear someone shouting to her left, still hear Holloway making small sounds of pain, but quiet in the sense that those things receded. They became background. The scope swam gently with her heartbeat. She found the shadow in the depression. Her finger moved to the trigger guard. Not the trigger yet. She waited. She was waiting for the wind to tell her. The sand on the flat ground shifted a small eddy, a momentary pause in the surface movement, a 3-second window when the wind was running cleaner and more predictably than it had been. Now, she moved her finger to the trigger. The gun is just the last part. She exhaled, half a breath out. Hold. The reticle was on the depression. Not on what she could see in the depression. On what she knew was there. She squeezed. The rifle kicked back against her shoulder. She kept the scope on target through the recoil habit, instilled so young it was below conscious thought. She watched. 3 seconds. 3 seconds at supersonic velocity across 3,100 meters of hot desert air. 3 seconds in which no one spoke. Harris had stopped moving. He was watching her. Cole had stopped. Briggs had stopped. Even the soldiers who had been preparing to move, readying themselves for the deadly run back through the riverbed, had paused, arrested by something they couldn't quite name. The specific quality of attention she was paying to the scope, the stillness of her. 3 seconds, then, no second shot from the ridge. It was the absence that landed first. The sniper had been firing every 2 minutes, patient and rhythmic as a clock. 3 seconds passed, 10 seconds, 30, nothing. The radio crackled. It was Corporal Winters, who had been running communications from a secondary position 40 meters back. Ridgeline, this is Kilo forward, I've got partial uplink. Standby, static. Then, broken but readable, target down. I say again, target. The voice on the other end was the emergency channel they'd been trying to reach. The satellite burst had gotten through. Someone on the high ground, a secondary observation post they hadn't known was there, had been watching. Target down. Harris didn't move. Cole turned slowly and looked at Emily. She was still prone behind the rifle. She hadn't moved since the shot. She was watching the scope, watching the depression in the rock face, waiting. Nothing came from the ridge. She lowered her cheek from the stock. She looked at the bipod for a moment. She looked at her hands. They were not shaking. She noticed this as a fact, the way she noticed wind speed. From the eastern end of the position, someone said something. She couldn't hear the words, only the tone. Then another voice, same tone, low, edged with something between awe and bewilderment. The firing had stopped. The ridge was silent. The desert, which had been a place of violent, compressed terror for 90 minutes, was very suddenly just a desert again. The enemy's ground element, whatever coordination they'd had, whatever timing, collapsed without the sniper holding the blocking position. They probed once, half-heartedly, from the western approach, and Cole's squad saw them off with 2 minutes of purposeful fire. They didn't try again. Backup arrived 37 minutes later in 2 vehicles. By then, Thornton had the wounded stable. Okafor was white-faced and quiet but talking. Holloway had fallen asleep, which Thornton said was fine, which was either true or a kind lie. The others, Reyes and the 3 others with grazing wounds, had been patched and were functional. Harris organized the withdrawal with the efficiency of a man who has been doing difficult things for a long time. The vehicles took the wounded. The rest formed up and moved. Emily carried the M110 back to the vehicles. She cleared it before handing it to Whitfield, who took it from her without meeting her eyes. She didn't say anything. In the vehicle, bumping back across the desert toward Ridgeline, she sat against the side panel and looked at her hands again. The knuckle of her right index finger had a slight abrasion from the trigger guard. She'd been gripping tighter than she realized. She pressed it with her thumb. Stanton, sitting across from her, was looking at her. She looked back. He looked away. Okafor, 2 seats down, eyes closed, head lolling with the motion of the vehicle, suddenly said without opening his eyes, "Hey, Carter." "Yeah, thanks." She looked at the ceiling of the vehicle. "Get some sleep," she said. Back at Ridgeline, the debrief was conducted with the thoroughness that Harris always applied: timeline, positions, ammunition expenditure, communications failure, casualty assessment. Emily sat at the table and answered the questions, put to her in the order they were put to her. At the end of the operational section, Harris put down his pen. The room was quiet. There were 8 people present. They were all looking at her, or not looking at her in the specific way that meant they were very aware of not looking at her. "Corporal Whitfield," Harris said, "your assessment of the shot." Whitfield had the look of a man doing honest arithmetic. The target was at 3,100 meters. Wind was running southwest at a gradient, harder at elevation than at ground level. The correction applied was approximately. He paused. He said the number, which I would not have applied. My calculation was more conservative, and my calculation would have been wrong. Another pause. Mine was wrong this morning. The second shot I fired wrong, red on the wind gradient. I was using ground level data. He folded his hands on the table. It was an exceptional shot. In my professional opinion. Harris looked at Emily. "Sergeant Carter," he said. The use of her rank, deliberate, not her last name alone. "Explain your wind calculation." She explained it. She explained the surface particle analysis, the plume observation, the gradient estimation. She explained the ballistic correction chain. She explained how she'd identified the target position through pattern analysis rather than direct observation. The room was very quiet. When she finished, Harris was still looking at her. "How long have you been able to do this?" She thought about how to answer that. "A while," she said. Harris came to find her an hour later. She was behind the supply tent again, sitting on the same ammunition crate, the Remington in her lap. She had stripped it completely and was reassembling it from the receiver up. He stood in front of her. He didn't sit. "Who are you?" She looked up. In the field, under fire. She had been moving too fast to feel anything much. Now, in the quiet of the late afternoon, she could hear something in his voice that she recognized, not admiration exactly, but its close neighbor. The sound of a framework being revised. "Sergeant Emily Carter," she said. "Logistics." He almost smiled. "Almost. Your father," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd clearly made some calls. She looked back down at the receiver. "He was a good teacher. The record shows he was considerably more than that." "The record doesn't show much," she said. A pause. "You could transfer," Harris said. "I can make the recommendation myself. Precision unit. Long-range element. You'd be— No. The word was simple. Not harsh, not emotional. Just a complete answer. He studied her for a moment. Why not? She thought about her father. She thought about what it had cost him, not the mission, not the dying, but the years before, the weight of being exceptional in a direction that never lets you be anything else. The way a skill like that became the only thing people saw. She thought about the supply manifests, the clean columns, the ammunition counts that were always right, the SAT radio batteries in the right columns, the invisible architecture that kept 30 people operational in the desert. I'm good at my job, she said. Harris looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. You are. He turned to leave. He stopped, without turning back. For what it's worth, I was wrong about you. She kept her eyes on the receiver. You made a decision under the information you had, she said. That's all anyone can do. He didn't answer that. She heard his boots on the sand, walking away. She listened until she couldn't hear them anymore. She kept working on the rifle. The official report described it as a precision engagement at extreme range under adverse environmental conditions. There was a number attached to it, 3,118 meters, confirmed by post-incident survey. There was a note that the shot had been taken under non-standard circumstances by personnel operating outside primary designated role. The report was filed. It went somewhere. People read it, or they didn't. At FOB Ridgeline, things changed in small ways. Stanton no longer looked through her. Briggs brought her a coffee the morning after, didn't say anything, just set it on her crate and walked away. Cole nodded to her differently, with the slight elevation of the chin that military people use to acknowledge someone they placed in a higher category. Okafor, when he was mobile again, stopped by the supply tent every morning. He didn't always have a reason. He'd ask about some piece of equipment, or tell her something he'd heard, or just sit on the crate next to hers and be quiet for a few minutes. She didn't tell him to leave. Whitfield found her one afternoon and asked her a question about wind reading at elevation. She answered it. He asked another. She answered that one too. He came back the next day with a notebook. She taught him what she knew. Not all of it. There wasn't time for all of it, but enough to make him better. She was precise about it, the way her father had been precise. She started with watching. Find the thing that tells the truth, she said. He looked at her. What does that mean? You'll know it when you find it. 3 weeks later, a colonel visited Ridgeline for a routine assessment. Harris had a conversation with him that Emily was not present for. The colonel asked to meet her. She sat across from him in Harris's office, a prefab structure with a steel desk and a single photograph on the wall. Desert terrain from a different deployment. The colonel had the bearing of someone who had read many reports and had learned to read the spaces between the official language. He looked at her for a moment. We'd like to offer you a position, he said. I'm fine where I am, Sergeant Carter. He leaned back slightly. I'm not talking about a sniper unit. I'm talking about training, long-range assessment and instruction. You'd be teaching people what you know. She looked at the photograph on the wall. She thought about Whitfield with his notebook. She thought about what it was like to watch someone find the thing that tells the truth. She was quiet for a long moment. I'd need to think about it, she said. It was the first time she hadn't said no immediately. The colonel nodded. He seemed like a man accustomed to patience. Take your time, he said. That evening, Emily sat outside the supply tent with the Remington across her knees. The sky in this part of the desert did something remarkable in the last hour before dark. The light came in flat and golden, and turned everything the color of old copper, and the shadows were long and precise, and the air lost its brutality and became something you could almost call gentle. She looked west. The wind was dropping. She could feel it on her face, the shift from the southwest flow to the calmer evening air. She read it automatically: direction, speed, the small fluctuations that carried information if you knew how to listen. She thought about her father. He had been exceptional. There was no honest way to say otherwise, and it had cost him things that she could see clearly now, in the way that only distance and time allow you to see clearly. It had cost him the ordinary life, the unremarkable days, the freedom to be unknown. He had not seemed to mind. Maybe that was the thing she had never quite understood. He hadn't carried his skill as a burden. He'd carried it the way a carpenter carries the knowledge of wood, as something that was simply part of the texture of how he moved through the world. She had been trying to put it down. Maybe that wasn't the same as being free of it. She set the Remington on her knees and looked down its barrel unloaded. Just the habit of checking the bore. A door opened somewhere behind her. Okafor, out for his evening walk, his legs still bandaged, but his gait steadier than it had been. He passed behind her. He glanced at the rifle. You're going to take that position, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I haven't decided. He walked past. Over his shoulder. Yeah, you have. She listened to his footsteps fade. The desert went on for a long time in every direction, flat and enormous and indifferent to all of it, to the patrol, to the shot, to the report with its careful official language, to the colonel and his offer, to everything that had been decided and not decided. She thought, don't chase it. Let it tell you. She looked at the rifle. She looked at the horizon. She put the rifle down, picked up her notebook, and wrote a single line. Not a decision, not an answer. Just the thing that was true. Some work doesn't stop being yours just because you set it down. The sun dropped behind the ridge, the desert went quiet, and in the silence, the real silence, after everything, Emily Carter sat very still and watched the light change and thought about what she would do next. In the post-incident report, the shot was classified as extreme range precision engagement. The recommended follow-up notation read, "Asset underutilized in current role. Recommend reassignment review." The notation was filed. The woman who had fired the shot went back to her manifests the next morning. She had 14 inventory updates to process and a SAT radio battery to track down. She found it in column D. She always found it.